Welcome to the Chrisman Commentary, Daily Mortgage News Podcast. I'm your host, Robbie Chrisman. Topics on today's episode include the latest from the agency, or that's GSE, Fannie and Freddie news cycle, my interview with Odeta Kushi from First American on why Americans are staying in their homes longer than ever, the economic and policy forces behind this trend and what it means for the future of housing mobility and market recovery, and I take a look why Federal Reserve rate cut odds have dropped. Did you know that the Fly Homes Guaranteed Backup Contract, available in all 50 states, gives borrowers a bona fide purchase agreement on their departing residence, helping them exclude that mortgage DTI calculation and remove the home sale contingency when buying their next home, all in under 24 hours. For the past 10 years, Fly Homes has been a pioneer and leader in innovative financial products, helping more than 5,000 buyers purchase their next home and enabling LOs to close 1.2 more loans per month on average. To learn more, visit flyhomes.com. For the next several days, and I guess for the past several days, I've been in Florida and will be in Florida in mortgage meetings and at the MBA Florida. And in Saturday's commentary, which isn't published via podcast, but is online at chrismancommentary.com, I noted the intense flurry of conference activity this week and last. One continuing theme to varying degrees is conjecture about Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and their role in lending. By many accounts, the agencies are driving 10 miles per hour in the fast lane. A focus on ending their conservatorship, which conference goers were told by FHFA Director Pulte last month in New York, would begin in earnest in 2026. Apparently has moved to now. A key issue continues to be whether the government's role in the future will include an explicit or implicit guarantee if we see another 2008. It would be helpful if it minimized the impact on agency rates because those have a ripple effect through other mortgage products. Our MBA will be focused on educating regulators and Congress about this, since most were not around during previous attempts at removing them. Communication through the appropriate channels is critical for changes that can impact thousands upon thousands of borrowers, potential borrowers, lenders, and vendors. The GSEs communicate pricing changes to lenders as they do investors that sell to them. Remember when, for no apparent reason, the FHFA had Fannie and Freddie raise their G fees? In response to complaints that guarantee fees were sometimes changed on short notice, impacting the pipeline of lenders, FHFA instituted a practice that requires Fannie and Freddie to give 60 days advance notice of any G fee increase of more than 1 basis point. Speaking of changes of more than 1 basis point, Treasury yields rose across the curve to close last week, including 2-year yields topping 4%. Money markets trimmed bets that the U.S. Federal Reserve will cut interest rates this year. Traders now see a roughly 70% chance of a quarter-point rate cut by September, compared with the probability of about 90% the day before the May payrolls report. The amount of easing priced in for the year declined to about 43 basis points in total, fewer than 2 quarter-point cuts. Why? Well, the Fed is likely to remain in wait-and-see mode until the direction of inflation or the job market becomes clearer. A lot of that hinges on the inability or ability to determine whether President Trump's approach is a well-calculated negotiating strategy or simply driving headlines and kicking the can down the road. Time may tell, but hands may be forced if the uncertainty results in business leaders scaling back expansion and hiring plans, and the Fed has been in restrictive territory for a meaningful period of time, and the recent trajectory of inflation indicates that monetary policy is working, albeit with a lag. For today's interview, I want to welcome to the show First American's Odeta Kushi to talk about why Americans are staying in their homes longer than ever, the economic and policy forces behind this trend, and what it means for the future of housing, mobility, and market recovery. She's the Deputy Chief Economist at First American, and in this role, she leads the development of analysis, commentary, and forecasts on trends in the real estate and mortgage markets. Her research focuses on economic trends impacting real estate, including demographic shifts, affordability, and housing supply, as well as monitoring and analyzing quarterly surveys and economic data related to the housing industry. You and I are some of the few, the proud, the young people in the mortgage industry, and it's cool when I cross paths with a fellow millennial, and we're making waves in our own little ways. But I want to hear your origin story a little bit. How you even knew a career in economics or the mortgage industry was viable, and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I'll give you the short version for everybody's sake. So I was born and raised in a country called Albania, small country in Southeast Europe, and was able to witness the difference between growing up in a transitioning economy versus a more well-developed economy in the United States. And so that piqued my interest in understanding economics, economic growth. What are the drivers of economic growth? Really focused on private property rights as a mechanism for development in graduate school. And that ultimately resulted in a deeper interest in real estate economics. I think real estate economics is fascinating because we all need shelter, right? It's food, water, shelter. It's one of the things that all humans need, and so it's a fascinating field to study. It also intersects with all other sectors of the economy. You know, you need a healthy and robust labor market for real estate transactions and activity to be robust. So you have to have a broader understanding of labor market trends and, of course, the broader macroeconomy, interest rates. It's a very interest rate sensitive sector. What impacts interest rates? And so it's a field that requires some level of expertise in other economic fields as well. And so that certainly was a draw as well. And hasn't let me down. It's always changing. Always need to stay on top of new information, new trends, new data sources. And so every day is different. And I'm grateful that every day that I got into this field.
It is such a cool profession. I remember reading Freakonomics in like fifth grade or sixth grade and going, this is so cool how like people can make careers out of looking at everyday things that they find interesting. And so that's really neat that you've been able to turn that into a full-on career. Your talk about developing versus developed countries makes me think of this meme format that I saw recently, I guess. And it's essentially a bell curve where somebody starts out kind of with a stupid opinion, and then the peak of the bell curve, they have this super nuanced opinion. By the end of the bell curve, they've gone back to their stupid idea. It would be like, you start drinking beer and you say Modelo's a good beer, and then you get advanced and you say, oh, this micro niche craft IPA is the best beer, and then you get to be a really experienced beer drinker and you go back to Modelo's a pretty good beer. So I
Back
would
to the
say,
basics.
yeah, back to the basics. And I'd say with like developing versus developed countries, yeah, I say this a little tongue in cheek, but maybe America has become so developed that we don't need mobility anymore. People can work from home and they don't necessarily have to move to cities to make the finances work like they might have in the past. More Americans are staying in their homes longer than ever before. Can you explain some of the why behind that? And then I guess ultimately the impact it's having on the housing market.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think this is a key issue that should be highlighted. According to our own analysis, and to your point, the median tenure length in the U.S. hit a record high of 9 years in April of this year. So historically, that's a very long time to stay in one's home. And there are several drivers that we've outlined of this trend. The first one is arguably the most obvious in today's housing market, and that's the rate lock-in effect. We know that homeowners are sitting on ultra low mortgage rates, just over 4% on average, and current market rates are near 7%. So moving would mean trading a low monthly payment for a significantly higher one. And this financial disincentive has really frozen many would-be sellers and, of course, slowed the churn of existing home sales, which we know has really struggled to gain any real momentum. It's just been sort of bouncing along the bottom. The other trend that's more of a longer term demographic trend that we've outlined is seniors aging in place. More seniors are aging in place than ever before, especially compared to previous older generations. And that's really a function of advances in healthcare and home technology that have just made it easier for seniors to stay in their homes. This has also reduced housing market turnover and kept homes off the market. Supply is an obvious one as well. If you're an existing homeowner, the fear of not being able to find something better to buy is a powerful deterrent. And while we know that inventory has been increasing this year, especially in markets like Texas and in Florida, overall, supply is still historically low. So a homeowner who wants to move can't sell unless they can also buy, and that results in fewer sales. We also know there's been lower foreclosure rates. That's a good thing, but foreclosures reduce tenure by necessity. And the number of foreclosure starts is about 70% below the 5-year pre-pandemic average today. And so certainly that that means fewer homes cycling back into the for sale pool. And then credit standards are still historically tight. So when it's harder to get a mortgage, it's harder to move. That increases tenure length as well. And then the one factor that I like to highlight, but isn't necessarily, it's almost the counter in today's market, home equity. High levels of home equity should be encouraging more turnover in the market. It's sort of this wealth effect. When you're sitting on a ton of equity, it might give you all the more reason to move. But in today's market, we're not seeing moving up or downsizing due to high levels of equity. I think a lot of that just comes from uncertainty and the ongoing lack of supply. So there's a lot of different reasons driving the increase in tenure length, but that's where we are at today, and it's holding back market activity.
Although market activity is being held back, I would postulate that we're starting to see a little more movement, at least in terms of borrower psychology. A couple of years ago, or last year even, it was kind of the rate. Oh, there's this big lock-in effect with rate. We've almost moved past that. People say, well, how can I tap into the equity of my home? Or, I'm ready to get off the sidelines. I don't think rates are going to come back down anytime soon. I might as well kind of bite the bullet and move forward here. We sit here at the start of June 2025. How significant is the mortgage rate lock-in effect currently when it comes to discouraging mobility? That's kind of part one of the question, how significant it is. And the other part would be, are there any policy changes going forward, maybe removal of some of the tariff uncertainty that could help mitigate some of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And to your point, the mortgage rate lock-in effect, I would say, is still a pretty significant factor. About 82% of mortgaged homes today have a rate below 6%. And so there's still, it's still pretty sizable. But to your point, it has narrowed. The lock-in effect peaked in October 2023 because rates were significantly higher. And then we still hadn't had a lot of people locking into these higher rates. So the way that we get that lock-in effect to come down is just really time. It's more people buying homes at higher rates. And of course, the other side of that is potentially rates coming down a little bit from where they are today. And I do expect the lock-in effect to ease. And I would also say, to your earlier point, on the rate discussion, we sort of went through these stages of grief with mortgage rates where there was denial at first, right? Of course, mortgage rates are going to come back down to 3%. Of course, they're going to come down. And then as time went on, we eventually got to acceptance. And I do think that we're in that acceptance phase today where, people are looking around and saying, well, maybe rates in the 6 to 7% range are the new normal. And I think we are going to see people move despite the rate lock-in effect. These life happens types of moves where you are sitting on a lot of equity. And so you can use some of that equity to offset the higher interest rate on your new home. And so that's one mitigating factor. And then, of course, people move because they need to move. They have to move for jobs. They have to move for kids. And I think that we're seeing that in today's market. Even with rates at 7%, you're still seeing, 4 million annualized existing home sales. And that's a testament to the fact that people are overcoming that rate lock-in effect.
Yes, shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. We finally made it to acceptance. Odeta, I'm so happy to be there with you. Let's talk about the way some of these trends have evolved in terms of where people's feet actually are on the ground. There's this talk of Zoomers, I guess, moving to places like Boise, Idaho. The Florida and Texas kind of blew up during the pandemic. A lot of that has reversed course. I think home sales in Florida have stalled here. We're seeing a lot of inventory on the market, but I'm wondering if you as an economist can speak to kind of the larger demographics, the aging population, how these things are shaping inventory and housing trends across the country currently.
Yeah, demographics are so important. We started the conversation talking about getting back to the basics. And when we talk about housing, it's all about supply and demand. And demand is all about headship formation or household formation. And so I do like to zoom out. we talk about interest rates all the time, but really zoom out and look at these longer term demographic trends. And there are two key demographic groups that I'm looking at today. That's the millennials that are still aging into their prime home buying years. I still think we have a tailwind of millennial demand in the housing market. Their homeownership rate on average is just above 50%. They're buying homes later and later in life because they're making lifestyle decisions such as getting married and having kids later in life. And so if you look at the 40-year-old millennial, their homeownership rate compared to the 40-year-old when the Gen Xer was 40 or the baby boomer was 40, the gap between the homeownership rates isn't very large. But if you look at the 30-year-old millennial compared to when the baby boomer or the Gen Xer was 30, that gap in homeownership rate is about 6 percentage points. And so that's testament to the fact that millennials are interested in buying homes or just doing it later in life. So I still think over the next several years, we have this tailwind of millennial demand. Over a longer term, decade horizon, I think we've got to start talking about aging baby boomers. The population of 80 plus is expected to nearly double between now and 2040, which means a lot of boomers will be slowly aging out of their homes. And a lot of these homes are in prime locations, but they will need quite a bit of work. So we'll probably see some renovation demand over the next decade or so, but this will unleash quite a bit of supply on the market. It's not a silver tsunami, as has been quoted in the media time and time again. Demographic trends by definition move very slowly. So maybe like a silver glacier or something, but we will start to see the aging out of baby boomers impact the supply side of the housing equation over a longer term horizon.
Can I ask on a personal level your thoughts on migrate, at least for your life, your thoughts on migration or how it's impacted you? I bought a house in California a couple of years ago that I've been working on remodeling. I travel all the time, and I almost view it more as like a money pit for a lifestyle rather than an investment. There's an emotional attachment to it, and I like traveling, and so I feel like it's mired me down in some ways. And I also bought it for myself. It's not like I have a wife or kids, and so it's like I've reverse engineered a life for myself, and I might have to uproot all that if I want to settle down. You said you lived in DC. How's your own circumstances impacted your housing decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it ultimately buying or renting is a lifestyle decision. To your point, if you're someone who moves around a lot and you don't really want to, dig roots in one particular market, then renting might make more sense. I've been in DC for 10 years now and will likely be here for some more time. So buying made a lot of sense for me. And I like the idea of investing in a property and making it home. And of course, there are the wealth benefits of homeownership that have been the primary driver of wealth creation in the United States is housing wealth. And so that's always something to consider as well.
And then I want to talk about policy a little more here. And obviously, if you're in DC, it's a great place for understanding the way policy is shaped and how that it can impact things. And obviously, real estate, people will tell you real estate is a local issue. I think we saw recently California passed a Prop 13. Some policies like this can contribute to people staying put. When it comes to, and actually here, let me explain Proposition 13 a little more for listeners. It's a constitutional amendment that California passed, which significantly altered property tax assessment. Limits property tax to 1% of the property's assessed value and restricts annual increases to 2%. Policies like this, they contribute to people staying put. Do you think any of these should be reevaluated to spur more movement? Obviously, the government benefits on some level if they can reassess the tax value of a property to a higher current value than keeping it pegged or controlled.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And in our analysis, we found that out of the top 50 markets that we track, 6 of the top 10 markets with the highest tenure lengths are in California. And that's partly due to Proposition 13, which, as you mentioned, caps property tax increases and really creates a strong financial incentive to stay put. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing. I think that from an economic standpoint, Prop 13 discourages mobility. Homeowners are reluctant to move because they're taxes would reset to current market value, which locks people into homes they might otherwise sell. And that limits housing turnover and contributes to supply constraints, particularly in very desirable urban markets. So, I do think that there could be some reason for reconsidering Prop 13 or changing it, especially just from a housing turnover perspective. But, I was going to say, I think your earlier question, I'm realizing now that we're talking about policy that you had also asked when we were talking about the mortgage rate lock-in effect, because both Prop 13 and the lock-in effect have this effect on mobility. And I think you would ask, is there any policy changes that could help mitigate this? I always come back to addressing the housing supply shortage. I always think that that's one of the more sustainable housing policy solutions in the country, both for easing the lock-in effect and also, fixing the affordability crisis, sustainably fixing the affordability crisis. Policies aimed at increasing housing supply, especially of starter homes and affordable housing, could help mitigate things like the lock-in effect, because when there's a greater supply of homes, homeowners find it easier to find suitable and affordable options, making them more willing to sell their current homes and relocate. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. You can incentivize builders, you can address zoning laws, you can use federal land, a lot of different ways to do this. But I do think that addressing that supply shortage is a sustainable policy solution to easing that rate lock-in effect and also the affordability crisis in the country.
Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you to pull out your crystal ball here a little bit. And I would say that kind of tying all of the things we talked about together today, you and I are part of this social media era where it seems like people want to impress their lifestyle upon others, and maybe they're maxing out their credit cards at high interest rates, and they have less ability to save and to buy homes. People want to stay in, it's kind of, I guess some people call this homebody era that we're in, where there's the lock-in effect. Kind of put all this together. There's tight credit out there when it comes to what companies are willing to offer. Obviously, the non-QM box is expanding that a little bit. I'm throwing out a bunch of conflicting signals here, but there's low foreclosure rates. Maybe delinquencies are starting to increase. You're the economist. Make sense of it all. What trends do you think are here to stay, and what do you see as more transitory trends?
Sure. I think the demographic trends will sort of take over from a long-term perspective. We have more than 40% of existing homes are owned by baby boomers. And as I mentioned, the number of Americans aged 80 and older is expected to nearly double by 2040. So as more of this generation transitions out of homeownership, these homes will return to the market, boosting supply and potentially lifting sales activity as well. So I think that there is this longer-term demographic shift to be mindful of that could reduce this homebody era. From a short-term perspective, I still think that rate lock-in effect will hold back market activity. We took a look also at a housing survey that showed 43% of homeowners plan to stay in their current home for more than 10 years. So economic uncertainty, I think, could also contribute to people staying put. And certainly there's a lot of macroeconomic uncertainty in today's market. So just from a short-term perspective, that could drive people to stay put for a little while longer. So I think when we're talking about whether we're nearing the end of the homebody era, there are push and pull factors. I think over a short term, there's reason to believe that we'll continue to hit higher tenure lengths, but over a longer term horizon, we could start to see that homebody era start to ease.
Very valuable insights. I'm really appreciative you made the time.
Thank you so much.
Traders were looking at the Bureau of Labor Statistics' May non-farm payrolls report for signs of how Trump's trade war is affecting the economy. The report was the main economic release last week and showed that 139,000 jobs were added in May, versus 126,000 expectations, and poor figures reported earlier in the week by ADP. The unemployment rate was 4.25%. Despite coming in higher than forecasts on the headline figure, the prior 2 months were revised lower by a combined 91,000, and most of the job gains were limited to hospitality and healthcare sectors. And while the report marked a slowdown in hiring from the previous month, the figure was stronger than if large tariffs on China had continued. When taken alongside the declining quits rate and slowing job openings, it points to a softening labor market. Additionally, the workforce population increased by 188,000, while the labor force fell by 625,000, meaning the number of people collecting paychecks fell by almost 700,000. This is why many view BLS jobs created as illusionary, as they are based on statistical adjustments to the data, such as births, deaths, and immigration, rather than people collecting paychecks. Which helps to explain the difference between the ADP jobs report, where only 37,000 jobs were created, and BLS data. Additionally, the ISM Manufacturing Index declined for the fourth straight month, and the Services Index also fell into contraction territory for the first time since June 2024. Both indices cited uncertain international trade conditions due to tariffs as influencing the headline readings. A significant decline in import orders suggests that the pull-forward effect observed earlier in the year may have run its course. Economic growth appears to be moderating, and businesses appear to be operating with caution, not dramatically laying off workers, but also not rushing to hire. This week's key events include $119 billion in refunding supply to be auctioned over Tuesday to Thursday. May CPI and PPI will be released on Wednesday and Thursday, respectively. Besides the normal weekly releases, the rest of the data includes small business optimism, the budget statement, and preliminary June Michigan sentiment. No Fed speakers are currently scheduled, as the Fed is in blackout ahead of its meeting next week, though the quarterly financial accounts will be released on Thursday. For MBS, Class A 48 hours is tomorrow, and Class B net out is on Friday. Today's economic calendar kicks off later this morning with wholesale inventories, previously unchanged, and sales, previously up 0.6% month over month for April, as well as the May Employment Trends Index. We begin the week with agency MBS prices slightly better than Friday's close, the 2-year yielding 4.01, and the 10-year yielding 4.48 after closing last week at 4.51%, which was up 12 basis points over the course of the week. Let's wrap up with a joke and some housekeeping. A guy from Florida sued American Airlines because an expensive piece of luggage wasn't at baggage claim when he landed in New York. He lost his case. Thanks to today's podcast sponsor, Fly Homes. The Fly Homes Guarantee Backup Contract, available in all 50 states, gives borrowers a bona fide purchase agreement on their departing residence, helping them exclude that mortgage from DTI calculations and remove the home sale contingency when buying their next home, all in under 24 hours. To learn more, visit flyhomes.com.